As we all bore witness in disbelief to the deadly attack on our nation's capital last week, the rest of the world was watching with us. A new Politico Playbook article entitled "What Europe Thinks of America After This Week" takes a closer look at how Europeans view the, quote, shining city on a hill amid the fallout. Here to discuss it with us is the author, Politico Chief Europe Correspondent Matthew Karnitschnig. Matthew, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Matthew, you're from Arizona, but you spent the past several years chronicling European politics and the transatlantic relationship in the age of Trump. How does Europe specifically view the United States and President Trump now? I mean, we had a general sense over the last 4 years, but given the events of last week, what are you hearing now from the capitals of Europe and the people who run those countries?
Well, unfortunately, I think what happened on Wednesday just confirmed people's worst nightmares, really, that the United States is no longer a stable democracy. That's their perception. Whether that's true or not is another thing. But the perception here is definitely that the spectacle of these right-wing, unruly, protesters or rioters, whatever you want to call them, storming the Capitol is a sign that the United States is not the stable partner that it has been really since World War II, and that Europe cannot continue to rely on the U.S. in the same way that it has. And that could have quite sweeping ramifications in the years to come. Even if they feel more comfortable with Joe Biden, I think there's a sense that, well, we don't know what's going to happen in 4 years if Trump is reelected, or if someone like Trump is reelected. We could be facing a very similar crisis, so we need to look at our options now.
You talk about, there's been much debate about what it is that happened on Wednesday, right? Whether or not, and this was an attempted coup, you bring it up, a French word, as it may, which is appropriate for your expertise. How do you define what happened on Wednesday? Do you think coup is an appropriate word?
Well, to be fair, I'm pretty far away here on the other side of the world. And I think, though, that it is important to look at the perceptions, because the perception becomes reality. And, as someone from Arizona, as you pointed out, I would say, well, that looked to me like a bunch of rednecks, for, the loss of the lack of a better word, who had been riled up by Donald Trump, and they drove from all over the country to Washington, and they did what we saw on television. I do not think that is representative of even a minority of what most Americans would want to see or would want to happen, even for people who voted for Trump. But the point I think we're trying to make in the piece is to say, the perceptions of our allies abroad is much different. Whether it was an actual coup or not is almost secondary, because they are going to make strategic decisions based on this perception that it was a coup, and a coup attempt, and that the United States might not be the reliable partner that it has been. And you're seeing that already, even before this, in decisions that the Europeans have made vis-a-vis China, for example, where at the end of December, they agreed to go ahead with a pretty sweeping investment pact with China, despite objections from the incoming Biden administration. So, this is a sign that they might want a little more equidistance between themselves and the world's great powers going forward.
Matthew, speaking of the way that other countries are looking at these events, as we play some of the video from last Wednesday, I spent last week looking at some of the headlines from newspapers all around the world. I looked at newspapers in Latin America and in Asia and in Europe, certainly, in India, and oftentimes the word coup was used. In Germany, the word putsch was used, which is a reference to a coup. The one difference, I guess, that, if you want to look at the real definition of the word, which would entail control of the military, control of the media, and actually, when you overrun the Capitol, controlling the Capitol. It was clear, and Timothy Snyder had a great op-ed about this in the New York Times. He wrote a book on fascism, on tyranny. He says, I'm going to quote here, "It's hard to think of a comparable insurrectionary moment when a building of great significance was seized that involved so much milling around." So the point that Snyder is making is that if these insurrectionists had a better plan, if Donald Trump was not all about Donald Trump and actually intended to carry this out, we might have seen a very different outcome. But because it was sort of lackadaisical, his call to arms from some of these individuals, we didn't see what we've seen happen in other countries. Doesn't mean it wasn't happening.
Well, that's right. And I think that, if you want to look at the positive side of things, which I try to do, it's become more difficult over here to convince people of this view. But I point out that, in fact, all of the main institutions of the government withstood this challenge. I mean, whether it was the Justice Department or the court system, even the vice president at the end of the day did the right thing. You saw most of the senators do the right thing. So I would argue that, if anything, this showed that American democracy does work, and this seemed to be more of a security issue or a security failure on the part of the authorities in Washington, rather than a well-organized coup attempt.
Yeah, and the question is whether or not our allies and enemies around the world viewed it the same way. Thanks for giving us a little bit of insight. Matthew Karnitschnig, thank you.
Thank you for having me.